Chapter 9, Land Use Regulations and Environmental Issues. In this chapter, we're going to distinguish between private land use controls and government powers relating to the control and use of the land. We're going to describe environmental issues and hazards and substances, especially those that are subject to federal legislation and landmark preservation and historic districts. So, land use controls. The ownership rights a person possesses in a parcel of real estate are subject to public and private land use controls, including zoning ordinances, building codes, and deed restrictions. Deed restrictions can only be placed in deeds by private parties, not by the government. And those restrictions placed in deeds are called restrictive covenants. Illegal restrictions in deeds in violation of the law are not enforceable. Deed restrictions run with the land. And restrictions can be added with time limitations or based on a happening of a certain event. We call these sunset clauses. If there is not a sunset clause placed in the deed with the restriction, then the restriction runs with the land. It passes from one owner to the next, and it never goes away. So deed restrictions are placed on property by private parties, not by governments. Let's do these highlights now. And who can enforce restrictions placed in deeds? Well, neighbors or the original subdivider may enforce deed restrictions through court action. You could also add their owners, remainder man, heirs, and devisees. The book only put their neighbors or subdivider because the prior paragraph is specifically talking about new developments and how it's often used by developers to put restrictions on the individual properties in a master deed, and that could limit what the minimum buildable lot size is. Let's just say the minimum buildable lot size the developer puts in there is larger than what the municipality would allow. Like the developer minimum lot size is 100 by 100, but a municipality would allow 50 by 100. What's the minimum lot size requirement you have to follow? The more restrictive rule, right? When two rules cover the same topic, the more restrictive rule will prevail. In that case, it would be the developer's larger lot size of 100 by 100. Because if you were allowed to follow the cities, you'd be able to put two houses on that lot. So let's go over some of the government powers. They give you an acronym here. I hate acronyms for the most part, most of these acronyms. But here's one that helps you remember the different governmental powers. PEACH. Police power, eminent domain, taxation, and SG. So what is a police power? These are powers passed from the federal government to states, counties, and municipalities to make legislation for the general welfare of the public. That can place restrictions on property owners, such as policing. Yeah, the cops. Can cops just bust down your door if they think something illegal is going on there? No, they need to get a warrant, right? But let's just say they were chasing an armed criminal who just shot at them. Are they allowed to chase them into your house if they close the door behind them? Are they allowed to rush right in after them and bust the door down? Most municipalities in New Jersey, I'd say yes. But in some areas throughout the country, municipalities put their own rules in place. They may require you to stop, get back up, wait for a warrant. Even though you saw them just run in the house with a gun and they just shot at you. Yeah, depends on the municipal's rules. Environmental protection laws, okay? They're there to protect the environment, right? Not always. Sometimes they're just abuses of power. I told you, like during the first Obama administration, he did wide sweeping legislation that gave all kinds of additional powers to the EPA. And those powers were abused. It gave them authority to regulate areas that they previously were not allowed to regulate, like wetlands that haven't seen water in ages, or properties like in the in the desert that may have a little grass. There's what they call a desert turtle. There was an instance where there was the family of farmers that have been farming their cattle, and they've been grazing on this property since before our nation even became a country. So their family had been using that property for a long time to graze the cattle on. But now the EPA suddenly comes in and says, well, there's a rare desert turtle sometimes that goes through that land, and your cows could be walking over them and killing them. So you can't be on that property anymore. It's like, well, wait a minute. We had a precedent. We've been using this since before the EPA was even created. What are you talking about? We got to graze our animals here before it was a country. So they came out with their rifles, or as the politicians like to say, their automatic machine guns to threaten the farmers. They actually ended up in a confrontation and shot the father and killed him, and then arrested and jailed the two sons. And it wasn't until President Trump got elected, that he had nothing to do with this, but it wasn't until President Trump got elected that a case got to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ruled that the EPA overstepped their boundaries, released their two children from prison with an apology for killing their father.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When it comes to this new thing of like these data centers, how does that affect our jobs? Because that can cause light pollution, the noise pollution, like even
Yeah.
in the water as well. So doesn't that bring down property values as well? And how can property owners fight back, or do they have a way to like sue the data centers or anything for bringing their property value down?
No. But you could argue to your local politicians that you elected that you're not going to elect them no more, and that you're going to do everything you can to kick them out of office. And they're going to lose their coveted positions as politicians if they allow this to happen. Council members and the mayors, even the governors. You don't want it. Now, that's a little bit of a catch-22 there, too. You know, I understand why nobody would want that in their backyard, but everybody loves AI. Everybody wants to use it. You need data centers for that, though, to satisfy that computing power. Granted, they should put it somewhere where there's no population. There's plenty of land that has nobody living near it, you know, nowhere near the population. But you know what? Some environmentalist is going to freak out too, and they're going to be like, oh, you can't do that in the pristine wilderness or in an area where nobody lives that's not affected by humans. You could be affecting the poor little animals or the fish or somebody's going to bitch and complain about something. You know, you can't please everybody all the time. And your local politicians are looking for ways to make money. You're right. I mean, the mayor of my town's even doing crap like that. He's looking to sell off the Linden Airport, which I don't see how he can legally do it. Even though the city owns the airport, it's regulated by the FAA. And there's certain governmental emergency use needs of that airport. But he's looking to sell it off to get hundreds of millions of dollars because he's been pissing away money like it's nobody's business. You know, nepotism gone wild. In my town of Linden, you have this guy fires people so he can hire his family members. He created a new job for his wife, paying her more than his salary of $180,000 a year. And then he kicked everybody out of a school administrative building to give it to his wife to have as her office place. But she teaches ESL, English as a second language, but not even to children, but to adults. It's mainly, she calls it and renamed it a welcome center. It's a welcome center for illegal aliens to come in where she will help them get benefits and teach them English as a second language. In exchange, the Linden taxpayers pay her $180,000 a year salary and gave her that administrative building that the school used to be a school administrative building, so they kicked them out. They're putting them somewhere else. And then he gave her $650,000 to remodel it. However, the estimates that for what she wants to get done came in at over $1 million. So they just recently raised it to give her another 400 and something thousand dollars. Nepotism gone wild. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, you got to vote these politicians out. You know, people are only starting to see this with this guy, but they still vote him in. They still keep voting him in. You got people that back him no matter what because he's got an old folksy way and a nice smile on his face. But he's every word that comes out of his mouth is a lie, and he's full of crap. He's self-serving. He does backroom deals with developers all left and right. We got properties going up. He does these meetings out of town. He actually has what he calls his team of people that are on the city council. They're yes people. They vote for everything that he wants. He voted to remove a law that we had in our town that was an anti-nepotism law. And then after he did that, he's hiring all family members. Both of his sons got hired to the positions straight out of high school as in the water and sewage authority, getting high salaries. Gave his wife this job, hired his cousin. They fired the audiovisual guy that does the stuff for the town, fired him and hired his cousin at 4 times the rate. He doesn't do as good a job. I mean, it's crazy. You got to vote these people out. It's politics. It's often political decisions that are doing this. That's the same thing with them digging up the park over there in Clark. They're not fixing the park. They're going to destroy it. There's a lot of this stuff that goes around. You're asking if they could sue because the property values may go down. Well, you don't know until they actually go down. But still, no, you can't sue a business because your property values go down and claim that it's that business's fault. I guess you could sue anybody, but you got to win and prove it in court.
I mean, it's over the top though. If you're like ruining an entire community's like ability to live and breathe and see and like be comfortable.
I ain't arguing with you.
Yeah.
It's the politicians that are allowing it. And until you make a big enough stink, they'll still fight you on it, even if you make a big stink. You got to get a big enough stink to get people.
I've seen people getting dragged out of these meetings, these council meetings. They're not letting them talk if they're like going against the agenda.
Yeah,
they're not going to let them speak. So,
and who are these council mayors and the member who's and the mayor who's part of a council? Who are they supposed to be representing? Seems like big business and the sales so they could get more money in. But who are they supposed to be representing the best interest of? The people in the town, right? But they're not. They're actually kicking them out and shutting them up and silencing them. Look, they've been doing this for years for other topics and people don't complain as much. Only a handful of concerned parents. When it came time to having mandatory classes, teaching your children about different alternative sexual lifestyles or transgenderism or things of that nature. What the hell does that have to do with your education? Parents have been complaining and been getting arrested and even having charges put against them for trying to not get that stuff taught to their kids. In the past, that was obscene. Obscenities they don't belong in school. You shouldn't be talking to a kid about sex, right? Not unless it's certain things talking about sexual diseases and things of that nature, trying to educate them, abstinence and safe sex and stuff, but not teaching them how to perform, sex acts and reading them sex stories at a young age. It's the same kind of nonsense that's been going on. You get the same outrage. People go down, they voice their opinions, and they get shut down, shut up, arrested, dragged out. Same thing's happening with the data centers. It's the same thing. It's been happening for a while, and because it's been allowed to happen, because maybe you agree to some things, but not to others, when it finally does affect you, you're outraged, but you can't do nothing about it, right? The only thing you can do is vote them out, change them. people get comfortable in their positions and they push it for all they could get out of it. I know this. I'm running for political position myself for council president in my town, because I'm sick of the bullshit. I mean, I don't want to do the job. I don't got the time to do this crap. But nobody else is stepping up, so I put my name in the hat to do it. I I doubt I'm going to win, but hey, what the hell? You don't know till you try. Not that I really want to do it. I got better time, better stuff to do with my time, but somebody gotta, right? So you have to do something, play your civic part, get out and vote, right? There should be term restrictions, on certain political positions. Same thing with Congress, right? The Senate and Congress. You got some people, they get in there till they die. They never give up on those jobs, and they keep getting voted in by their constituents in their areas, even though they rip them off constantly. Look at Nancy Pelosi. She was in there to what, 80 something. Somebody actually created a stock watching app. She's involved in insider trading. Every piece of legislation she practically voted on, she actually had her husband do stock trades. They called it the Pelosi stock trader. Well, actually, there's a different name to it, but that's essentially what it did. It tracked the Pelosi stock trades because apparently she has the best, her and her husband have the best financial minds in the world. They have the best stock trading. It was like a 800 and something % profits on any investment they ever made. Nobody has the stock trading history and success that the Pelosi's do. So some guy came up with an idea. He created an app to track the Pelosi stock trades so that other people can, because it's usually based on legislation that was coming up before her. It started with Visa and MasterCard, but I don't want to keep getting into this. But politics affects, you got to get these people out. If the longer they serve, the more they learn how to embrace corruption and game the system to their benefit and advantage. So you guys know the only way to keep politicians clean, you change them often like diapers. Right? That's a good saying. I like that one. You change them often like diapers. That's the only way to keep them clean. But you got a lot of ignorant people out there. They'll vote for somebody because it's on their team. They got a D or an R next to their name, or maybe it's because of their race and they're just glad that they're in there. That's happening in my town. This guy's getting voted in just because he's black. He hasn't done anything good for the black community, but yet he keeps getting voted in. But now people are starting to see, and you're starting to see a lot of black people turn against him too, and his family, for the corruption involved. It's a lot of different things that go on in towns, but ultimately it's your vote. The only way to keep politicians clean and working in your best interest is to have some kind of term limits. You change them often like diapers. Don't give them a chance to learn how to be corrupt. All right. So police power. Let's get back to this class now. All right. I know these are conversations. They come up. They're local issues. But hey, real estate is local. You go to the New Jersey Realtors website. You could read up on those political issues. They got local, state, and national political issues that our lobbying group. Yeah, we got our own lobbying group. That tries to lobby politicians into voting on things that benefit our industry, just like a lot of other lobbying groups. So police powers, they cover environmental protection laws, zoning and building ordinances that regulate the use, size, occupancy, construction, and the rental of real estate. Eminent domain. What is eminent domain? That's a power of not just governments. We'll see who has the powers of eminent domain. Let's just talk about it now as what it is. It's a power to seize privately owned property for the greater good. The greater good, hopefully it really is for the greater good of the public. But the owner must receive just compensation for their property that's being taken. And the process of taking the property through the courts, if not agreed upon, is called a condemnation hearing or condemnation. Now, eminent domain powers are granted to the government and certain quasi-governmental authorities like public utility companies, land clearance commissions, railroads, public housing and redevelopment authorities. Can I, Victor Kaminsky, take your property by eminent domain? Sure, I can. Even though I don't have the power of eminent domain, I know who does. So what I could do is I could go to one of these parties that have the powers of eminent domain, tell them how it's in their best interest or in the municipality's best interest to take this property and give it to me. Use their power of eminent domain to seize this property, justly compensate the owner, and then give it to me so that I could use it for something. Because it's going to generate more tax dollars for the municipality, and more tax dollars allows you as a politician to use it for your pet projects or whatever for the greater good of the general public. But why do you need my property? They may not. See, a homeowner, a property owner could fight it and ask that very question. Why do you need my property? How come you can't take the property down the road? Why do you need my prime location property? Because that's the one they want. So you could argue this. But you guys have seen it in the news recently and online social media. What's it, those farmers in Cranberry? You know, how they were trying to take away their couple 100-year-old farm so that they could build housing developments. But wait, in that same area, there are hundreds of warehouses that have been built that are unoccupied and not being used. Why not take away one of those by eminent domain? Why do you need that person's farmland? Oh, because the location is prime. You know. So are eminent domain powers ever abused? Abso-freaking-lutely. Who keeps them in check? Well, it should be the politicians, but often they're the ones abusing it. So it's us. We need to vote them out if they're abusing their power. Okay, so what do we call the power to seize the property of a privately owned private individual with just compensation for the greater good of the public? Eminent domain. What do we call the actual taking of the property using the powers of eminent domain through the court system? Condemnation. You need to know that for exams. Taxation, that's a charge used to fund the operation of government. And then we got escheat. So when somebody dies intestate, no heirs can be located, the property reverts to the state. That's escheat. So these are the governmental powers of land control. You can snap a picture because I got them all right here, everything you need to know. Or you can do all the highlights here. Page 146. These are two, and then on the next page will be the other two. Okay, next page. Oh. Before we get to the other two, here's a court case about eminent domain. Do you think it's right? And you think it should be legal for a politician to be able to take your property by eminent domain just so they could turn it over to a developer to build something on it. So basically they say, hey, we need it for the greater good of the public, and then they turn it off and they turn it over to a developer, or maybe someone who's going to turn it into a used car lot or a new car lot. Well, there's a court case, Kelo versus New London, in Connecticut. They used the eminent domain authority to seize private property to sell to developers. The city said developing the land would create jobs and increase tax revenues. So that's why it's for the greater good of the public. Suzette Kelo and others whose properties were seized sued New London in state court. The property owners argued that the city violated the Fifth Amendment's takings clause, which guaranteed the government will not take private property for public use without just compensation. And specifically, the property owners argued taking private property to sell to private developers was not a public use. So the Connecticut Supreme Court, and eventually in 2005, the United States Supreme Court ruled 5-4 along party lines, I'm guessing, for New London. After the court's decision, the city allowed a private developer to proceed with its plans. However, that developer was unable to obtain financing and abandoned the project altogether, but the property was still taken from those property owners, and the contested land still remains an undeveloped, empty lot today. How effed up is that? So, the right of eminent domain is granted by state laws not only to public agencies and governmental bodies, but also to those other public utilities and quasi-public bodies like land clearance commissions and public housing and redevelopment authorities. And then you got taxation, and then here's what escheat is with your cross-reference to chapter 20, where we explained in depth what escheat, how escheat works. And here's your acronym, PEAT, for police power, eminent domain, taxation, and escheat. We also got an explanation here about that inverse condemnation, which you're not going to get on exams, but you can find it useful at some point. And to recall, just to recap while you guys highlight this stuff, inverse condemnation, once again, is when the government puts so much restrictions in place that they eventually render your property useless, so they devalue it. You could actually sue the government for the devaluation of your property because it can't be used for all these purposes because of environmental control and zoning and all kinds of other governmental powers that restrict on how you could use your property. So you could sue them to be justly compensated for that loss in value. That's inverse condemnation. Not on exams, so don't worry about studying it. I just want to give you a recap of what it is. You may find it useful one day. Okay, everybody got these highlights?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So once again, that's everything there. Police power, eminent domain, taxation, and escheat. And the power of taking your property through the court system is called condemnation. Okay, so public land use controls include things like zoning ordinances that dictate how what a property can be used for. Municipal governments authorize the implementation of local master plans to manage a municipality. Every municipality has a master plan that covers how are we going to handle the housing for the residents? How are we going to handle the health care, the emergency response, police and fire and ambulance, the medical care? What about food? We need supermarkets, this, that, and the other thing. What about the traffic? How's that going to happen? How are we going to manage a municipality in the event of natural disasters or war? All these things are covered in a municipality's master plan and a lot more. So then they submit the master plan to the county, and a county collects all the master plans from all the municipalities, and they create their own master plan. And then they submit their master plan to the state, and the state collects all the county's master plans and their municipalities' master plans, and they make a state master plan. And then they submit it to the country. So then the US government creates a master plan. This is how we operate as a country. Okay. Those master plans that start at the local level all the way up to the national. And they could cover things like zoning ordinances. These are laws of the local governmental authorities, like your municipalities and counties, that regulate and control designated districts they call zones. They control the use of the land, what it could be used for, and the types of structures that could be built where and how. Land use zoning classifications and subclasses. So here are 7 common zones. Your municipality may have many different additional zoning classifications or subclasses. For example, residential. Well, you could have residential, and then you could have subclasses under that. Because it's just zoned residential. Does that mean you could put up a 1-family house? What about a high-rise or an apartment building? You could put anything there in a residential zone? No. They've got different classes of zoning. You have R1, R2, R3, and so on, different districts. Now, let me give you an example by opening this zoning map of the city I live in Linden. I got a zoning map for that. Let me see if I can pull that up. Where is it? Get to it from here. Yeah, there we go. I got one. So let me open up this zoning map for my municipality to show you as an example. So this is the city of Linden. All right. This is their zoning map. You can see it's color coded in different areas. And there's a legend here in the upper right-hand corner that tells you what these zones are. You can see R for the residential. We have R1, R1A, R2A, R2B, R3, R1-B, RD. There's a lot of different zoning classifications in my municipality, and these are the current zoning ones. Runway protection zones, okay, has that dashed line. We have an airport in our town, okay? So you have all these different zoning classes. R1A is single family only with at least 50 foot of frontage. R2A is 2-family houses with 50 foot of frontage. R2B is 2-family with 40 foot of frontage. R3 is apartments. And R1-B is a single family with at least 40 foot of frontage. And you can see they're all color coded here. So you go here and you can see the different color codes. R3, R1, so R3 was apartment buildings. R1A, that's this color here. That's single family houses with at least 50 foot of frontage. The green one, what is that? R1B. These are single family houses with at least 40 foot of frontage. And so on and so forth, okay? So that's what zoning maps look like. So zoning ordinances, let's highlight, are laws of local government authorities like municipalities and counties that regulate and control the use of land and structures within designated districts or zones. All right, so even when it comes to zoning laws, they could be abused too. Remember this one? Exclusionary zoning, a discriminatory zoning practice outlawed by the Mount Laurel court decisions, a zoning power abuse requiring larger lot sizes anywhere in the municipality, which effectively priced poor people out of neighborhoods who could not afford them, those larger lots. So they didn't have a range of zoning throughout the municipality. So now they have to provide a range of zoning, and they could create a map with all the different areas where you could have different lot size requirements for building different kinds of structures. The first zoning ordinances ever created in New Jersey was in 1967 in Trenton. I don't know what the first zoning law was or what it was about, but the first zoning law that was ever created in New Jersey was in Trenton in 1967. Those are laws that allow the government to create rules on how you could use your property and what you could build where. A non-conforming use is a property use that does not meet the current zoning requirements. But then again, it doesn't have to. Why? Because the non-conforming use was used for that purpose before zoning laws were ever created or changed. So you're allowed to continue using it for whatever purpose you've been using it for. It is your use is older than the law, so it's grandfathered like your grandpa, it's old. And we allow your grandpa to stick around, right? So we allow your old use to stick around too, as long as you don't change its use or discontinue its use. Then they may be able to not allow you to use it for that purpose anymore. Okay. You ever see a candy store or a convenience store in the middle of a residential neighborhood? You guys ever see that? You ever wonder how they get a permit to put up a commercial storefront in the middle of a residential neighborhood? Well, because it was probably there before the zoning law in your municipality was created in that area that designated that residential and didn't allow commercial. But that property had been used for that purpose before the zoning law was changed in your particular municipality. When zoning laws are created, it's not like a blanket law that now all municipalities throughout the state is the same. Each municipality is different. They have different zoning rules and regulations, and even if they adopt the same rules, they may be implemented at different times. So if your property was used for a particular purpose before those zoning laws were created or changed, its use is grandfathered. It's allowed to be continued. So non-conforming use, you don't need to get a permit for using it for that purpose. It's grandfathered. However, if you got a property now you bought and you want to use it for a purpose that doesn't meet the current zoning requirements, to vary from the current use allowances, you could file for a permit called a variance. This is a permit for a new use or proposed use that does not meet the current zoning requirements to allow varying from the current zoning laws. Now, keep in mind, even if your municipality agrees to give you this variance permit, it's first going to be subject to you sending, as a property owner, sending a letter out to everybody within 300 feet of your property. And as long as none of them object to you building or doing whatever it is that you're planning on doing, then they'll allow it. Somebody objects to it, you're not going to be able to do it. Now, you could always argue their objection and go back and forth, but that could take time. It could take taking days off work, going to court. You know, not everybody will fight it. So who do you file to get a variance from? Don't just say the city. The Zoning Board of Appeals. They're the ones that grant or deny variance permits based on need because of a hardship that was created by the zoning laws that impacted somebody negatively. I'll give you a couple examples of that in coming slides. Now, subdivision regulations cover the following and then some. First of all, what is a subdivision? A subdivision is when you have one big lot and you divide it into smaller lots, and you build maybe little houses on each lot. Anytime you divide a big lot into smaller lots and sell a smaller lot off of a larger lot, it is now classified as a subdivision. New Jersey, the state of New Jersey, allows your local municipalities to decide what constitutes a major subdivision that requires a public hearing and what constitutes a minor subdivision that does not. Either way, subdivision regulations cover the following: the location and grading. Grading is like taking the land and flattening it, leveling it out, all that, doing the mass earthworks removal or moving around. The alignment, surfacing, and widths of the streets, highways, and other rights of way. Installation of sewers and water mains or wells. Minimum and maximum lot sizes and density area ratios that you could build over, because then what about the water for drainage? Where does that go when it rains? Building and setback lines. Setback is the minimum distance from a property line that a structure can be built. Every municipality has them, but just look at a fence. Can you put your fence directly on your property line that straddles the property line, separating your neighbor's property from yours? Or does it need to be a couple inches or feet in your property? Depends on your municipal rules. What about a shed? Can you put it right on the property line, or does it need to be in your property a little bit? In my town in Linden, if you build a shed, it needs to be 3 feet off the rear and side. That's a setback. There's different setbacks for the actual house. It needs to be a larger setback. But these setbacks, well, let's highlight these things first. Exclusionary zoning and non-conforming use. Page 148. Okay. I'll give one more explanation and then we're done here. So, I guess there was one more slide after this one, and then we're done here. So, highlight under zoning variations, highlight a variance from existing regulations to allow the use that does not meet zoning requirements, and put the word permit after variance. This variance is a permit from existing regulations that allow a use that does not meet the zoning requirements. And they give one example here. Say your municipality has a minimum requirement of a 30-foot setback from the front of the property that your house can be built. However, if you put a house with a 30-foot setback, there's a cliff or a mountain over there. That would create a significant hardship for you to be able to build. So as we could see on this slide right here, this house would be fine with a 30-foot setback. They got plenty of room back there to build this house. But here, a 30-foot setback, you can't build a house there because you got a cliff or a mountain over here. So this person would experience a hardship. So they could file for a variance that would allow them building their structure closer to the road than normally allowed because of that hardship. That's exactly what variance permits are for. They're not just because somebody wants something. I want a candy store in the middle of a residential neighborhood. I want to put up a marijuana dispensary in the middle of the residential neighborhood next to the school. You ain't getting that permit. Your wants have little to do with your gets. Okay. Now there's a lot more to go over here in this chapter still. So we're past the time now, so we're gonna stop and leave off right here. So let me stop the recording.